just doing the scale models. And these are about a quarter of life size, so about 4 times smaller than a average person. So I would generally cut out a square. I mean, it's not that random. I do measure it, so it would be going from the top of the hip to under the knee, and so this is sort of 7.5 inches long by the circumference of the thigh, which I've put as 6 inches. So if you times it by 4, that would be like 24 inches. So then I would hammer it from the inside a bit, like this. So I get a nice rounded shape. This is the shape of the muscles. Well, I was at university, and I was in my final year, and I didn't know what I should do for my degree show, and I tried lots of different mediums, and I hadn't really found one that I really liked. All I knew was that I really liked the human form and the human figure, and I wanted to use that was to be my subject, but I didn't know what material to use. And then after following a tutorial where the tutor said, I didn't have much time to deliberate any longer. I had to think of an idea for the degree show. So he said, I'll give you a couple of days to come up with a model, and then I'll come back and see what you've made. And then as he left the room, someone had discarded a bit of wire mesh on the floor, and he just picked it up and threw it over to me and said, do something with that. And I'd never used it before, so there we go. 23 years later, I'm still doing something with it. So if you try to imagine what this section of your leg would look like if it was opened out flat. So obviously it's wider at the top, and then it goes into where the knee is. So you're looking at a shape like coming in like that, which is what I've got. And then I start to sort of fold it around a bit to see what it might start to look like. You can get all sorts of different wire mesh, and the wire mesh that I use is called weld mesh, and it's welded into squares, and by nature it's geometrical, and it wants to remain that way, but every part of the human body is rounded, so it kind of resists being made into rounded forms. Okay, so I'm now kind of making a pattern for the bottom to come out of here. This would be the back of it, because there's the front, that would be the hip. I'll start putting a bit of extra detail now, so I'm going to start putting the hip bones and some of the bone structure of the knee on there. Now, I wouldn't normally use a metal hammer, because metal on metal can sometimes damage the wire a bit, but it's just to get some of the finer detail, and you can't get wooden hammers as small as this. The pressure is so important, how hard you hit the wire. You just have to, you kind of just get a feel for it after a while, how hard you need to do that. And then these little sharp bits which stick out where I've cut are called nibs, and you're basically interlocking them with pliers. So all I use are pliers, wire cutters and hammers are my tools. You don't need to use any electricity, any welding equipment, soldering, anything like that. It's all quite basic really. So there you can see I've kind of got the top of a leg. I've only nipped it together in a couple of places. And then what I would do is I'd go back and trim it off so that it's neat. Well, for me, because I prefer to do I like to do the life-size figures. That's really what that would be the commissions that I would mostly do. So, but I would never launch straight into a life-size commission. So for me, these are sketches. The small models are like the sketches into the 3D thing. Once I finish these, I can tell, well, are they the right proportion? And once they're right, as a small sketch model, all I need to do is scale it up, because each one of these squares is 1/4 of an inch, and the big mesh is 1/2 inch. So you just need to use a calculator and scale up a little bit, and then you get the right measurements. The other thing is, because I'm not using a solid material and you can see through it, sometimes you have to exaggerate it a little bit more as well, just to make it look normal. So if I was actually to do the exact measurements of someone, they would look a lot thinner and smaller than they actually are. So you just have to exaggerate a little bit. So these things that I made specially obviously to help me get the shapes and things that I needed. When I first started out, I didn't know that I needed rounded forms. All I knew was that it was pretty difficult to get what I wanted. So I knew I needed to invent something. So this is the right, similar sort of right calf. You have, the large muscle on the outside, and then this inner bit here. Again, I start twisting it round so it starts to starts to understand that I need to turn it around. So that's basically the kind of shape, and then that will go into that. I've just made a musical conductor for a music school, larger than life size. Well, he was about 6'2" or something. It took me several weeks to make, but then I don't work a normal working week. You know, I'll probably do about 80 hours a week or something. So yeah, it took a lot of hours to do that. So there you can see, here's a kind of quite a quick, let's call it a 3D sketch of a right leg. So obviously then I sew all the nibs together, cut all the excess bits off so it's nice and neat and tidy, and once it's all sewn up, I then send them to get powder coated. You know, they spray them with this powder, and then they put them in massive ovens, huge ovens at very high temperature, and it sort of electrostatically makes this really nice smooth cover over the top of the mesh, so it remains nice and shiny and smooth, so you don't cut yourself if you're touching it. Because I think sculpture should be touched. It's meant to be quite tactile, isn't it? So it's nice to be able to touch it without hurting yourself. So, I mean, the way I make the limbs and the feet and all the parts of the body has been a process that's taken me years and years to understand, and I've tried lots of ways until I found, this way looks the best. So I'm going to make a right foot now. So I start off with a shape about like that. So I look at it there, and then I try to imagine, well, where would the bone structure be and the muscles. So I'll start with underneath. So underneath, you obviously have your instep. Okay, so just clip it together in a couple of places like that. Okay, so I'm going to now start putting the toes in. I'll start with the little toe. So I just start pinching little shapes where the toes would be. Sometimes you just have to give a mere suggestion of something. You don't have to, you know, do every single detail, because your mind fills in the blanks. You'll notice that on the faces and the heads that I do, I never put noses or mouths or anything in, and yet you can still see that their heads, like a basic face, it doesn't have anything other than that I've pressed the eyes out, but actually it's enough to suggest what's there. Okay, and then that's it. So there's your basic almost leg with the foot hanging off it. Obviously I haven't done the heel. The heel is really important because that tells you what the angle of the foot is going to be. So even though I call them a sketch, you know, it can still take a number of hours to make a complete sketch of a figure. So I often do things in sequences, like the one spiraling up, or I've done sort of a whole series of a jumping figure or running figure to show every sequence in that event. You know, I've been inspired by photographers like Muybridge and Thomas Eakins, where the old photographers, where you would have seen they've taken every shot of a horse, say, running, and that's how they made the early films, didn't they? Because they put them all together and then it looked like they were moving. And so these, again, I like to do lots of stills and then show it in a sequence, and it gives it even more dynamism and movement. That's all right.